Today I'm going to do something that I don't normally do, which is review something. I'm going to be reviewing Dune today, and I have a bit of a different kind of view on it because I've read the book. I actually read this entire book. I'm so proud of myself. I know that sounds stupid to a lot of you, but I never read books anymore, and this is one of those books that I've always wanted to try because everyone talked about it and how amazing it was, and it was such a massive undertaking. This is book 1. There's like 7 of them, but I absolutely loved it. I was hooked right from the beginning, and I was along for the journey, and I read through this entire thing before the movie came out, and I'm so glad that I did, because when I watched the movie, I had a completely different sort of understanding for what was going on in it, so I thought it'd be good to kind of review it. I'm going to try and review it without spoilers first. And then we'll put up a big spoilers thing and talk about the movie in a bit more detail and maybe a little bit of the book. But I'll try not to spoil anything that the movie didn't get into yet that has been in the book, if that makes sense. I don't want to get too far ahead because part 2 of the movie isn't out yet. It's only part 1 and it ends halfway through this book. So there's a lot left to undertake. But let's just get into it, shall we? So first off, let's talk about the movie. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was an amazing piece of cinema. See, I can be a critic if I want to be. I thought it was phenomenal. I thought that the casting, first of all, was so spot on. Well, I guess I have a bit of a different feel for it because I never got to imagine what the characters looked like. They already announced the movie, I saw the trailer, and then I went and read the book. So I had those actors in mind as I was reading it, but they were so perfect. I feel like everybody was spot on for what they were supposed to be doing. Well, apart from maybe the Baron, I feel like the Baron was a bit of a sticking point for me, but I'll get more into that later. But casting was phenomenal. The sheer scale of everything was nuts. We got to see it in IMAX, which I feel like is sort of the way you're supposed to see this movie, because everybody says that, like, oh, the movie's so big in spectacle, it's so big in scale. But it really is. Like, you have to go to IMAX and see this, like, building-sized screen to see everything on it. When the worm shows up in that movie and it fills the entire screen, you're kind of like sitting there at what seems like an actual size of what those sandworms would look like. It was very intimidating. But not only that, but the sound design in the movie is some of the best I've ever heard. And you know me, I love a good sound design in anything. And hearing that in IMAX, there was moments where it was almost too loud. And I was kind of sitting there being like, man, I feel like I'm being blasted by Harkonnens everywhere. So cool. I feel like the movie was such an exceptional piece of work that everybody involved in it should be incredibly proud, because it was phenomenal what they were able to accomplish.
Hey, you. Put on some muscle?
I did?
No.
I am curious how people feel watching it without having read the book, because I feel like there was so much left unsaid that adds so much more detail to what's actually going on. And that's the case for any book to movie adaptation. You're never going to be able to get everything. But it was moving at such a fast pace. That might be surprising to a lot of you, because I've heard people say that the movie is very slow. But again, as someone who's read the book, it was lightning fast compared to that. There was so much stuff that just wasn't said. There's so much that's happening in the movie that I'm like, oh God, now we're here. Oh, now we're here. Now we're here. And it felt like it was just like pulling along so quickly that stuff didn't have time to sit and breathe, and you didn't really get the context for what was going on. But they also never mentioned the context of what was going on, so I think that that's okay. I'd be very curious for any of you who've seen it that didn't read the book, how the pacing was for you. What did it feel like? Did you understand what was happening in the story? Because there was also Dune is one of those things that it has so much terminology, so much world building, so many character names, so many different things like Mentats, Shai Hulud, the Lisan al-Gaib, which is also the Kwisatz Haderach. All these different things, all these different words that are being brought up that I feel like if you're just watching the movie is just going to go over your head. There's words flying at you all the time. And you either kind of just get it or you don't and move on, and it doesn't really matter because the words don't really matter. But I kind of just sat there watching the movie with my jaw on the floor for almost all of it. Every scene had so much visual palpability to it. Like everything was just so realized and so well done and getting to see like ornithopters in movie form. They're exactly how I pictured when I was reading the book. That was one thing that I didn't really see too much of beforehand, or kind of forgot. In my head, I was like, they always look like dragonflies. They're the helicopter things in the movie, and they looked exactly like I imagined them to. And there's so much of them in the movie that it was so cool to see them realized. And the sandworms were kind of what I had pictured in my mind. But there's also a bunch of other stuff that I didn't realize, like things like sand compactors. But there was so much in it that I had imagined in my mind what it was going to look like. And then in the movie, it was so much better. I will say that I feel like the Baron is the bad guy in it, played by Stellan Skarsgård. He was phenomenal in it. But there was a few little changes to some scenes with him in it, and I'll talk about that in the spoilers, but his character itself, I feel like, was changed a lot, and I feel like he didn't get enough screen time to be this imposing character that he was supposed to be. Every time he was on screen, he was, like, cool, and it was scary, but I feel like there's so much more of him in the book that I feel like they didn't do him justice in the movie, and I would have loved to see more of that, because every time he shows up, the scenes are so quick fired, and then it's on to something else. But I feel like that kind of happens a lot with the movie, and some stuff was left out that I'm like, yeah, I get that. You don't really need to have that in the movie. I don't really need to know the ins and outs of absolutely everything, but some stuff is absolutely crucial to understand the sort of politics that's going on to everything in that world. So I'm curious how they bridge that gap with the second movie. But something that I thought was really cool to see was the Bene Gesserit are such a massive, or Bene Gesserit as I was calling them in the book, but Bene Gesserit as they're actually pronounced, which was another thing in the movie. I got to hear how everything was pronounced properly. Like the gum, I kept calling it the gum jabber, which is the needle up to the neck. And it's the gum jabbar. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense, yeah. So it was just fun to see that stuff like be pronounced and kind of have it all fall into place in my mind now and hear how it was actually supposed to be. But I feel like the Bene Gesserit are my favorite part of the book. I think they're so cool. What they're trying to do and the powers that they have are so badass that seeing them in the movie, it was everything I wanted it to be. Especially hearing what they call the voice. It's a training that they do where they speak in a certain tone that gives power over some other person's will. So you find a frequency that I don't know if it's actually per person or if it's just per like race or species, but it's a very specific tone that you have to hit someone's ears, and then they do what you want. It's basically where George Lucas got Jedi mind tricks from, which another thing, reading and watching Dune, you'll see a lot of where it inspired Star Wars, because I think it came out first. So there's a lot of stuff like Dune, the planet. Arrakis is very much like Tatooine. They have like 2 moons. Tatooine has 2 suns. The Bene Gesserit are kind of like the Jedi. And I thought that was really cool to see where those sort of sources came from. And of course, Dune is inspired by other stuff as well. It's very much inspired by like Middle Eastern culture. And oh God, what's the movie? I had it in my head before I recorded this. Shit. The voice that they were using in the movie was so much cooler than I ever thought it was in the book. I thought in the book it was just like, come here. But it was like spoken with such calmness, such clarity that it kind of like pierced your brain and made you do things. But in the movie, holy God, if you don't see that in a theater or on something with subwoofers, if you're watching that on your laptop or a TV, you are completely missing like 50% of the experience with that. Because holy God, when they spoke the voice in the movie, in that theater, in IMAX, the whole room felt like it vibrated. It felt like my head was shaking, that I was gonna be susceptible to this thing. It was so badass. It's one of the coolest vocal sound effects I've ever heard in any movie, and it was the thing that I took away from the movie most. It was so fucking cool. I loved it.
It's time.
I'm gonna get into spoiler stuff now, but if you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend you go watch it. Let's put spoilers on screen for this entire thing so people know to avoid it. So I want to talk about where the movie ends. Because the movie ends after Paul fights Jamis, or Jamis. They call him Jamis in the movie, I think. It ends after him fighting Jamis, and I feel like that's such a a wonky place to end the movie, because it is halfway through this book, but Denis Villeneuve said that he's going to make the next movie be the rest of this book, also the next one. But I haven't read the next one. I probably will before the movie comes out. But I feel like that's so messy, because this book ends like in a decent place. There's obviously room for more. Whenever you finish reading this one, it's very clear that there's more to this universe. There's more that's going to be told. But it does end in such a way that it's like, I would be happy with that. And I feel like that story between like Paul and all these other characters really has a good arc in this book. I have no idea how you're going to do the rest of it. But the thing with this book is that the rest of what's in this that hasn't been shown in the movie is a little bit more boring. I feel like all the cool stuff that happens is in the start. There's a couple of cool stuff that happens in the book, obviously. But also, I think it's going to be an absolute narrative mess to incorporate. Like, it already felt too fast to do half of this book in one movie, but to do the rest of this book and another one in another movie, because he said he's only doing 2, I feel like is going to be an absolute disaster. I don't know how that's going to work narratively, and feel like it's given enough room to all of this stuff without skipping massive sections of either of them, because this book is split into 3 parts. It's book 1, 2, and 3 in this, but this counts as book 1, so it's like part 1, 2, and 3 technically. So I feel like if they were going to do it, I would have much preferred a trilogy, really flesh things out and do it 1, 2, 3. But in the world that we're living in now and how hard it is to get movies like this made, I get why they're doing it. And there's also stuff like, again, we're in spoilers for the movie now, Zendaya only shows up for like the last 5 minutes of the movie, if even. She's in it for like less than 10 minutes total. And as someone who's read the book and then seeing the trailers, I was like, why are they showing her so much? I was like, she's not going to be in the movie. If they end at the Jamis fight, she's not in it. She only shows up there. And Paul has like these visions of her like a little bit in the book, but she just barely shows up. So like, I got what they were doing, because Zendaya is such a massive name in movies these days. And I was like, you know what? I get it. Sell the movie with Zendaya in it a lot. That'll get people in seats. That allows you to make part 2. Business is business, and I want these movies to get made, so I get it. But apparently she was only on set for like 4 days to film it, so it's kind of interesting. I feel like a lot of people might go in expecting her to be in it more, and then leave horribly disappointed that she's not in it.
Smile, Gurney. I am smiling.
I do want to talk about differences in the characters between the book and the movie based on how much of the movie has been seen. So I'm not going to spoil anything that hasn't been shown yet. But in the book, the Bene Gesserit are like characters that are so well attuned to their emotions that they can quell them at a second's notice. They're able to dampen their emotions so much that they're able to just think so clearly in these scenarios, and that's where the fear is the mind killer litany comes from. And I feel like the litany didn't get enough. It was said in the movie, but I feel like it wasn't said clearly enough. It was said sort of haphazardly and kind of in the middle of all this other stuff, and it was so loud and you couldn't really hear what they were saying. And that litany is so important to the Bene Gesserit ways to like overcome your fear and let fear pass over you, and then look at fear's path, and where fear has gone, nothing will remain except me. So it's basically saying like, let fear pass you. Fear is not going to overcome you. It will pass, and then you will remain, and then you'll be able to think clearly and get past what you need to do.
Fear is the mind killer. Where the fear is gone, only I will remain.
But in the movie, Jessica's an absolute mess. She's crying all the time. She's like shaking. But in the book, she's just like, she has that internally. She thinks about that, and then she just quells her emotions. So on the surface, she's cool, calm, collected. Underneath, she has those worries, and then she quells them and moves on and thinks clearly. I feel like that didn't come across in the movie at all. But in the book, they write like inner monologues a lot. So I get that they can't really, in the movie there's no inner monologue, so they can't do that, so they have to show it more outwardly. So I kind of get why it is that way. It's just that's a difference with the characters from book to movie. I feel like Paul as well. Paul starts off kind of more happy-go-lucky, well, not happy-go-lucky, but he's a bit more carefree and a bit more inquisitive. And then after the Duke dies in the movie, he has like a big like moment of like seeing all of these visions, and he gets so intense and he sees the visions clearer than he's ever done before, and he becomes this completely different person because he's able to see like the future basically. And he's always kind of been able to see it, but he gets this like such sudden surge of prescient knowledge that he becomes a bit more cold after that. And I feel like his turning point, he was kind of one note in the movie. I think Timothée Chalamet was perfect for that role. I think he's a phenomenal actor and I love him. But I feel like that change kind of comes so quickly in the movie that it was kind of hard to feel sort of like a build up to it. It kind of was just like, oh, here we are. Okay, go. And then he's like, I'm a freak. And it's like, oh, okay. Because in the book, he like builds up to that so much. He talks about his terrible purpose. He kind of wonders why he's having these visions. And then suddenly when he smells the spice and it like all makes sense to him. And then he's like, oh shit, that's what it is. Oh God, what am I? And then there's a big reveal in the book that wasn't in the movie at all. I'm not going to reveal it here. That doesn't happen in the movie. And that was like a moment where I was like, no. I was waiting for it in the movie for everyone to be like, no. But it just never happened.
What's in the box?
Pain.
The only other thing that I would say that's very different, I mean, there's a lot of very different stuff, but I'm like plucking hairs at this point. Like it doesn't really matter. There is like a scene with a dinner where the whole thing about the Bene Gesserit is that they're able to see through anything you say. If you say something, they're able to be like, oh, there's slight hesitation in his voice. He did that and then he looked away. That means he's lying. Like they're perfect bluff readers. They're able to see through everything. And only the people trained in the Bene Gesserit ways are able to get through that sort of like poker face reading. So there's like a dinner scene where they meet a bunch of people from Arrakis that are all these really important like political figures on the planet. And like Paul and Jessica are reading through everything that's happening. And it's this like perfect mind game of political word warfare that goes on. And everyone's like not a whole lot is happening on the surface, but everything that's not being said is so intense. And it's one of my favorite scenes in the book, and it was such a shame that it wasn't in the movie, but I get it. There's a lot to get through and you can't really spend time on that. But the only other thing that I was kind of disappointed in the movie was the Baron. Because the Baron in the movie is like, he's menacing enough. He's big. He's supposed to be this obese character that needs flotation devices like grafted to him so he floats around because he's too heavy to carry his own weight. I do feel like he wasn't as large as I imagined him from the book. I feel like they could have gone a bit further with it and like made him like really menacing and imposing. In the book, he talks so cleverly. He's not a guy that is physically capable of heading into warfare, so he has to use his mind and his words. And he's so clever in the book. He's so like ahead of the game. He's so in tune with what's going on, and he's kind of like the Bene Gesserit in that way, that he's sort of like a step ahead of everybody. And that just doesn't come across in the movie at all. He's just sort of this imposing figure that has a lot of like power pull, like he's a lot of money and he's a big army, and that's kind of it. So I wish they kind of delved more into that, because I feel like Stellan Skarsgård could have really chewed up those scenes and like really been menacing. And because what struck me with him in the book was that he is this character that's not that threatening physically to see him, but it's when he starts talking that you kind of get scared of him. And I feel like they kind of leaned the other way in the movie. Again, I get it. There's a lot to get through, but it's so lightning fast in the movie that it would have been cool to see more of those scenes. Him and Piter, who's his mentat, the bald dude. Those scenes would have been cool to see. And there's a lot of stuff in the movie, like the mentats, like Thufir Hawat and Piter, who, if I said those names and you have no idea who they are and you've seen the movie, again, that might be part of the problem. But Hawat was the guy with the black stain on his lip, and he like rolls his eyes into the back of his head when he's like calculating something. Those guys are called mentats, and they're like human computers. They're trained to do like extremely fast calculations in their heads, and they're trained in that way because in the world of Dune, there's no computers anymore. There's a lot of back history. I'm not going to get into it here, but basically humans have become computers because they don't trust AI anymore, and it's outlawed. You're not allowed to use them because of something that happened in the past. So that's why he was doing that. So there's a lot of stuff like that, and people being able to travel through space. It was explained, actually. I forgot about that it's explained that they travel through space because of the spice. So the guild navigators use it and have these like prescient visions that it allows them to navigate space. It's really cool. And it's such a different take on sci-fi, even though this is like one of the grandfather sci-fi things, to not have like a button that you push and you go warp speed and you just calculate where you're going with a guild, like a map. But to have people do that is crazy. And then there's this big thing about humans versus like people who are altered, so to speak. So there's a lot of stuff like that in the book that I feel like if you want to read it, there's a lot of like added elements to it that I feel like are really, really cool that you'll be able to get into, and it'll just expand this universe so much more. I mean, that's the same with most books from movies. So I feel like there's some stuff missing, but I feel like the stuff that is missing, I get it and it makes sense, and you kind of have to just get through a movie, and there's a lot of stuff to get through. Even reading the book and having a thing at the back that you could like look at it and be like, okay, Arrakis, okay, that's the planet, okay, what is a mentat? And you could like look it up like a dictionary. It was still very confusing, so leaving most of that out of the movie, I guess, makes sense.
An animal caught in a trap will gnaw off its own leg to escape. What will you do?
Let's fight like demons.
We can take spoilers off screen now. I was going to do a thing where maybe I talked about book spoilers, but I feel like there's a lot of people who want to read the book now after seeing the movie, so I don't want to talk too much about that. I'll for the people who have read the book, I'll just say that I loved it. I think it's probably my favorite book that I've ever read. Again, I haven't read much. I feel like The Shining was the biggest book I ever read before this, and I think that was my favorite book up until this point. And I'm trying to get through Lord of the Rings as well, but I kind of fell off reading that and stuff came up. So I love this book. I think it's amazing. It was exactly my type of read because, again, I'm not spoiling anything, so don't worry. The way it's written can be difficult for some people because I said there's a lot of inner monologue stuff. So to read that can be a little overbearing for some people to read, but I'm the type of person that I don't like books that describe scenes from like a macro perspective too much. I like when characters are thinking and talking. That locks me in. I don't know if it's something got to do with my brain. I don't know if I have ADD. I don't know if it's just the type of writing that I enjoy. But I get locked into a scene and picture it so much better when I see characters talking to each other and like thinking to themselves. And that Dune was that to a T. And I was so locked in right from the first pages. It was amazing. I loved it so much, and I love the movie so much, and I can't wait to watch it again. It was phenomenal. I highly recommend it. I'd say if I'm going to review something, let's give it a score. I kind of want to do these more for things that are coming out. Like I thought about reviewing Squid Game when it came out, and Midnight Mass, because I love consuming media. I love movies. I love TV shows. I absolutely love narrative things. I love talking about them. I do it with Evelyn a lot. I just never do it in video format because I just don't know if people want to watch these. So if you want to watch these types of videos, please leave a like on this video so I know that people are interested in them. And I'll potentially do more in the future for stuff that I'm watching and new movies that are coming out and things like that. But if we're going to do a review, let's give a score to things, even though I don't think scores really matter too much because I feel like a lot of people just skip to the score and then don't actually listen to anything you're saying. And I feel like that's the whole point of a review, is to divulge knowledge, and then sometimes the scores don't match what you're saying. But I'll give it a 9 out of 10 and go against everything I just said. The only reason I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10 is because I feel like that's just for the absolute best of the best of the best movies that I will remember for the rest of my life. Like a Hot Fuzz or a... because it's my favorite movie ever. But I feel like just the pace of it was a little... It was a little like jumpy in parts, so I'll give it a 9 out of 10. Go watch it. Dune's amazing. Go read the book if you have absolutely any interest in it whatsoever. Even if you just want to like give part 1 of this book a read. It gets pretty far into where the movie was. I think there's a lot to keep you going in that. There's a lot of setup, a lot of stuff in it that is there's a lot of like reveals and it explains a lot of what's going on in the universe to there. And I feel like if you can get that far, which is a couple of 100 pages, you'll be hooked, and then the rest of it will be easy. Book 2 drags a little bit, but then book 3 really starts picking it up again, and it's phenomenal. I liked it a lot. Go watch it. Dune, baby!